Hello there.
Hey Topher, how's it going?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Doing alright. Just had to re-put both my kids back to bed. They both decided to wake up one after the
No,
other. You know
my
how
son came out of his room just like 5 minutes ago. I'm like, no, go to the potty, go fast.
that is. That's funny. So how's it
Kids are
been?
like that, so
Yeah, especially when you're trying to do something in the evening.
it's just like always the one evening when you need like a
Of
little quiet.
course. That's just how it goes.
So what was going on with your computer that you had to do a fresh
Oh
install?
my god, it was the worst. So what happened is about a month ago, I think, my dad came over. Both my parents, really, but my dad had never been to the house before. And one of the things I'd been trying to do is I was having some heat issues, so I bought a new heat sink. And I was like, I'm just going to pop this in, and he'll help me because he's had some experience with that sort of thing.
Mhm.
So we went to install it, and it didn't fit. It's too big.
Yeah.
Um, so we ended up putting the old one back on, the old heatsink. Um, and neither of us remembered exactly how to apply the thermal paste to the
Oh.
CPU. So what we did is first off, we used an entire tube of thermal paste, which apparently is not a good thing.
Mm.
And secondly, we smeared it to cover the entire top of the CPU before we reattached the heatsink. Apparently, that's also not what you're supposed to do because the oils from your skin can mess up with the thermal conductivity.
Oh.
So two mistakes there, two big mistakes. So I was having some serious heat issues, and last week I went, maybe 2 weeks ago now, and I cleaned off the thermal paste, reapplied it, and when I turned my computer on, I got this ridiculous blue screen error that basically said it couldn't find the boot configuration files. So I tried and I tried. I did everything I could, and it ended up looking like the only solution was to not only reinstall Windows, but I actually had to entirely wipe my hard drive and start from scratch. I couldn't even wipe the main partition. I had to blow away everything and start from scratch. So yeah, that was fun. But
Yeah.
things have been going better now.
That's good.
My heat is still a little higher than I'd like. I'm gonna try to mess with the fans. I think maybe tomorrow. Um, but it's functional.
It's a process, you know.
Yeah, yeah. And one of these days, what I'll probably have to do is actually entirely unmount the motherboard, which means I've got to take the video card off. I've got to take everything off. Because the Cooler Master that I bought, I think will fit, but the way the case is set up, and my other option is to replace the case, which might be necessary at some point.
The case is the one thing you shouldn't have to replace. Those things are supposed to last forever.
Well, no, so the problem is one of the problems is my airflow is all screwed up. I have a fan on the top of the case blowing down, and I have a fan on the back of the case blowing in.
Mm.
So what that means is I'm getting hot air vented out the back, blowing back through the top, and there's no real out venting of air. There's no fan blowing out. Ideally,
Okay.
what you should have is either all of your fans pointed out,
Mhm.
or you should have some sort of flow, like a fan on the front blowing in and a fan on the back blowing out or something.
Yeah.
Um, Also, the motherboard is kind of mounted kind of to the side, so I can't get behind it to attach the back plate for the
Yeah.
heatsink. So it's just all kinds of various
Yeah,
issues.
computers are like, oh, I can totally fix that myself, and it's just like, why is it such a pain? Like, I had to get a new video card, and like, I also had to upgrade my power supply because of that, because I need the extra cables, and like trying to like get the cable from my power supply to get to my hard drive, which is in a really weird spot, was such a pain, and I had to have my wife do it because my hands were too big. It just won't fit in there.
Honey, these bear paws, they're useless.
And I'm not a very big guy. I'm only like 5'9", but she still has more hands than me.
Yeah. No, I'm about the same. I'm about 5'8". Um,
Well, average height manpower,
exactly.
Got to stick together.
Yeah, I'm probably a good inch or two off from having a Napoleon complex. So. I know. I think all my coworkers are taller than me. But yeah, we haven't talked in so long. Like, a topic is going to be really easy because there's so much
all
stuff.
the new stuff.
Yeah, there's so much stuff out there to talk about.
Yeah, because there's Ashes, like you said, Acts of Aggression, Act of Aggression remake. It's almost a remake, pretty much. I don't even.
Well, they've redone a lot of the like
the systems.
The units are all very similar, but
the economy's been changed.
Yeah, the economy's been changed. The base building's been changed. Air units have been changed now. So a lot of new stuff going on.
And the crazy thing is, like, this is all post-release versus pre-release, because
this is a year post-release.
Yeah, which is kind of crazy. Like, I don't think I've seen any RTS undergo this big of a change. Well, I guess we could talk about that,
Yeah.
But yeah, it's big.
Do you want me to try the intro and we can actually start?
Sounds good to me.
Okay, it's been forever since I've done this. I actually had to go look up my intro. It's been so long. Okay, I'm gonna give it a try. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the Rebellious Tacticians Show. I'm Wayward, and with me is my regular co-host, Topher, and we are, this is the third episode of the Rebellious Tacticians Show, and we've got a lot to talk about, because there's a lot been going on in RTS lately. We've had Ashes of the Singularity, Stardox, and, what's the company, Topher? Is it Oxide? Bad.
I can't remember the exact
I think
one.
it's Oxide. Oxide Games have released their large-scale RTS, Ashes of the Singularity, and I'm excited about that. Is that a soda? You gotta.
Oh no, sorry. I was just adjusting my monitor.
Okay.
I apologize.
Not a problem. Sounds like you're opening a can of soda or something.
I wish I could recreate that, because that's pretty cool.
So I'm actually excited about Ashes of the Singularity, because as far as I can tell, pretty much every really large-scale RTS out there is basically a clone of Total Annihilation. You've got Supreme Commander, of course, Supreme Commander 2, Planetary Annihilation. These are all done by the same people, and Ashes is not like any of those games. I mean, there's some superficial similarities, superficial similarities just in the fact that it's a large-scale game. But they've done so many things differently, and I think it's going to be exciting to talk about. Of course, we also have a new Petroglyph RTS called 8-Bit Armies coming out, actually, I think, like next week, or this week by the time this comes out. And we have one of the most unprecedented moves that an RTS company has done. Active Aggression is doing a major mechanical overhaul a year after its initial launch. So there's a lot of big stuff going on that we can talk about. So first off, I want to go over what we've been playing. So you want to start, Topher? What have you been?
Yeah, I haven't had much time to play as I wanted to recently, but I've been trying to get back into Ashes of Singularity since it officially launched out of beta. And then StarCraft 2 also got its first mini single-player expansion.
Oh,
so
I haven't
playing
played that yet. You're going to have to talk about that, too, because I haven't played that at all.
That might be a good thing to talk about. And then I've been trying to go and play through a lot of the RTS from the mid-2000s, so Company of Heroes and like that era of RTS games.
Awesome.
Because so it's been a lot of fun. Even though I haven't had much time, there's been a lot I've enjoyed.
Yeah, I've been in the same boat. I've had some heat issues with my PC, and life has been really busy. But now that I'm back in action, I've been really excited. I got back into Deserts of Kharak. I've been playing Active Aggression. I want to do a side-by-side comparison because you can actually launch into the beta or the live game.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that. That's kind of cool that they have both running.
Yeah, and I want to do a feature-by-feature comparison of all the stuff they've changed. I've been playing Ashes of the Singularity. I haven't done any laddering yet. I've been too chicken to do that.
I wouldn't even come close to that. It's too intimidating of a game for me in terms of laddering.
So really just those three for the most part.
Well, those are the three big ones, right, that have come out recently. So
Yeah, well,
no shame in that.
well, I do think it's a big shame that more people didn't get into Deserts of Kharak. I think, and you and I actually talked about it, but because my PC died, we lost all that footage, unfortunately. But I just think it is a lot of fun. It's gorgeous. The campaign is incredible. And they're actually releasing sub-factions as DLC. Now, whether or not that's going to be receptive to a large audience, I don't know.
We've seen factions or commanders have trouble before in Company of Heroes 2, for example. So.
Well, yeah, and some of that's
and it's not the same, but
their
piecemealing out
system,
different factions can sometimes.
Well, I always like the relic model, like with.
I'm not personally. I don't mind it. Because I don't ladder a whole lot of Company Heroes 2. I mostly play it for co-op and things like that. But I know, reading online, a lot of people are not fans of it.
Yeah, it's been controversial, but personally, I think it's good. Selling factions or piecing them out in smaller pieces as DLC. Relic's model has always been similar to that. If you look back to Dawn of War, you get a new expansion, you get 2 new factions, you get a new campaign. But you didn't have to own either the original game to play the expansion or the expansion to play the original game. And you could, if you owned, what was there? Was it Winter Assault, I think? And you got the Imperial Guard, you could play just the Imperial Guard, and your other players could play Chaos and Orcs and what have you. So I think there's some precedent there, but what Deserts of Kharak did is not release a new full faction, but kind of like the Steel Talons from Command & Conquer 3, they released a sub-faction that changes some things about the core faction, some new unit designs, new audio, some new abilities. So it's interesting, and I think, given all the work they put into it, they had to price it a little higher.
Yeah.
But I don't know how successful that's going to be to sell a sub-faction. But I do hope they do more DLC. Their campaign was incredible. I'd love to see more story of the world of Kharak, because they just did such a great job.
Yeah, I mean, the lore is already, there's so much to explore there, and, it's a very popular, universe in terms of people who enjoy the Homeworld games, and so I think a lot of people probably bought it just to see what the campaign was going to be like. I mean, that's why I bought it, and it was a very good campaign. I really enjoyed it.
But switching tracks a little bit, Ashes of the Singularity. In some ways, it's one of the biggest, no pun intended, RTS launches recently. I mean, it's very large scale. I think there's no maximum number of units, and there's been, I think, battles with hundreds of thousands of units in them.
I knew there was a reason my PC couldn't run it very well. It's probably that.
Well, it actually runs surprisingly well on my PC. I didn't think that it would.
It did get better when it was released because they obviously optimized something between beta and release.
Wait, are you running Windows 10?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Because they do have DirectX 12 mode for Windows 10 that does actually run better than it would on Windows 8 or Windows 7.
Yeah, no. DirectX 12. That was one of their big driving forces, actually. I remember.
Yeah.
What's his bucket? Can't remember the guy's name, but Brad.
Brad Wardell.
Yeah.
Yeah,
he was talking about how that really helped push the game forward was DirectX 12.
I think he's very proud of the technology behind the game, and well, he should be. I mean, one of my favorite things about it, I'll jump right off the bat, is that it's a large-scale RTS that doesn't have you dealing with unit icons. I always hated that. I understand the need for it in a game like Supreme Commander, but I always hated it that you had these cool models, especially in something like Planetary Annihilation or Supreme Commander 2, and then you zoom out to, actually play, and all of a sudden all those cool unit models don't matter anymore. Just
become one icon. It's like, here's 100 units, one icon.
or even, like a commander or one of the experimental units that actually looks cool. You zoom out to play, and all of a sudden you're dealing with, what is it, 8 16 pixel icon or something.
Yeah.
And that never happens in Ashes of the Singularity. So I do really appreciate that, because you're always dealing with the actual game graphics, and I think that connects you to the game more in a lot of ways.
I will say it's a very niche genre. In a niche genre is these like macro, these very large scale RTSs, you know. But Ashes is probably my favorite one of them. But that's mostly because I'm not a big fan of them in the first place. But I do enjoy Ashes purely because it's very fluid in how it controls. There's not lots of time like where you just start doing nothing. That would happen a lot in Supreme Commander, you know, where it's just like downtime. It's like, just
to
bored.
me, it still has the weakness of a large-scale game, which is those incredible travel times. And I understand at some point in the future they're going to be adding transport units, which I think is going to be it's going to be great. Yeah, I think it really needs that, because units do have this kind of sedate move speed, especially once you start grouping them into an army, which kind of anchors everything to the slowest unit's move speed.
Why don't you talk about armies? Because that's one of the better features, I think, that separates it from other large-scale RTSs.
So I will talk about that, but I want to say that I think there are two big standout features. The first is armies, and I think if Brad listens to this, he's going to be happy, because when it first was introduced, I kind of dismissed it. And now that I've played with it, I do see the value. But the other feature is their Quanta resource. It's, to me, it's the thing that makes this large-scale strategic macro game tactical. It is a constrained resource in a game where resources aren't very constrained. I really like hard choices in an RTS, and you don't get a lot of that kind of limited resource feel in a game like Supreme Commander, and you do in Ashes, and I appreciate that. I think the Quanta system is a really smart system, and I'll talk about that more, I think, later if I can get back around to it. But so we were going to talk about the armies. So what armies do, for people who haven't played the game, is they're kind of like group plus. Say, in an RTS, you make your control group, and you group all the units together, you control them, but the army will actually intelligently place units, so it'll put higher hit points units in front of lower hit point units. And for the substrate faction, a lot of them have shields or energy, and there's a unit that recharges them, and those units will all of a sudden care about the other units in the army, not necessarily just the other units that they're close to. So it kind of changes the calculus on which units like that operate. And then the other faction, the Post-Human Coalition, they have a repair unit. And instead of operating on a repair radius that it'll look for injured units, it'll actually care about all of the other units in the army and try to prioritize units that need to be healed. So it makes the whole army object kind of smarter and care about other things in the army object as opposed to just things nearby. So now currently, as far as I know, you don't really have formations, which I think would be a neat feature. I'm not a really big proponent of formations, but I think in a game like this, especially where you have that army dynamic that really kind of changes how the units interact with each other, I think formations would make sense.
I think formations in a game like that would be helpful in terms of just helping. Well, also it would help your armies survive a little better if they had to engage by themselves. But also because not too many RTS games use formations. I think if Age of Empires 2 had formations.
Yeah, and there's a couple.
There's a couple, but
I can't think of too many off the top of my head. But I think I don't know if you remember Lords of the Realm 2. It was vaguely.
Oh wow!
I know, and I'm
trying to remember.
Back. I'm going way back. It was kind of like a Total War-esque game. I think you had this meta map. And then you would go into these instanced battles, often with a castle or something in them. But I think you had formations in games like that. But it's not a super common feature. But I think for a game like Ashes of the Singularity, it would be useful.
It's not something I would want in every RTS, but I think it would work in Ashes.
No, and I think in a lot of RTS, when people ask for it, they're really off base, but I think in like Ashes, it makes sense. Also cool is you kind of have experientially different factions. So the Substrate, they have force fields. They kind of focus on. They use some of their units have drone swarms, which are really cool. Kind of micro units that soak hits for their other units. I think it's almost Warhammer-esque, where you had a couple of Necron scarabs that exist as a buffer for other Necron units. It's the only really good
comparison, I guess.
Yeah. And then on the other side, with the Post-Human Coalition, you have units that have armor that just arbitrarily chops off, I think, 40% of incoming damage, which can be really impactful. And I think there are some weapon types that ignore that armor. So you have this dynamic where attacking the right unit with the right thing becomes important, and armies can help with that, because an army engaging another army will automatically reprioritize damage to where it's most useful. Although, of course,
I think that's been something we've seen in RTS for probably almost a decade, but it's gotten better and better as games have gotten better AI in terms of prioritization and things like that.
But even as recently as 2011, I think, with End of Nations, what the developer thinks is the best target isn't necessarily the best target.
That's very true.
Yeah, just because it's got bonus damage against something doesn't mean it's automatically going to win. But in a game like Ashes, where you've got hundreds of units fighting hundreds of units, it can take some of the burden off a player. But I do appreciate that the army is an optional feature, so if you really want to try to micro that more finely, you can kind of ungroup an army very quickly and focus on individual units.
Yeah. And that's something I was going to ask you about, because I remember Brad recently did an interview where he talked, actually I think it was with IGN, and it was not so much an interview, but him talking about how the future of RTS is more about improving AI by focusing more on the fact that computers have quad-core processors now and things like that. And he talks about how Ashes has, takes advantage of these more cores to push the AI, and I haven't really seen that in game, but you have more experience than I do. So do you think you could talk about, maybe what he's talking about, or?
So I've only, at this point, only played the AI, and have spent much of the time trying to familiarize myself with the game by playing the easy AI. So I don't have a lot of experience right now talking about the more advanced computer opponent. But I will point out that when he's talking about artificial intelligence, he's not necessarily talking about the computer player.
Oh, yeah, no, I meant how units move and things like that, and pathing and all that stuff, too. Or what are you thinking?
So I think when he's talking about that, one of the core things he's talking about is the army. Because, again, it does change how units behave in relation to each other. And I think that's something that we don't see in a lot of RTS, is units kind of being contextually aware of other units under certain circumstances. So again, in Ashes, where you have a healer unit, is the easiest example, I think. And I've heard Brad use this one before. I said the same thing a minute ago, but when it's not in an army, the healer has a leash, which is a range around itself, basically, that it's searching for damage units to be able to use its heal weapon effectively on that unit.
It's auto-cast, pretty much, I guess, is what a good way to say it.
Well, so really, I think, and I don't know because I haven't messed around with the game engine, but I think what it does is it treats it as a weapon, but it, quote-unquote, attacks units that have been hurt, and it effectively deals reverse damage or negative damage. Probably, either every 0.2 seconds or something like that. That's at least one way to implement something like a heal gun. It's not a spell, it's not casting it as an ability, but it's constantly searching around itself to see if there is a unit that needs healing. Now, if there's a unit that's 1 pixel outside of that leash range, it won't do anything. And to both the player and the game designer, that's not an optimal scenario. You know, that really arrests any feeling of suspension of disbelief you might have. That, you know,
you think your guy should be getting healed right now, but he's not, because he's just that little bit out of the way. And you're like, no, I'm stupid.
Right. And that sort of thing really matters in a game like StarCraft, where the onus is on the player to make sure they know the exact range, and maybe even to have the healer unit, you know, moving into that range as soon as the unit that needs to take the damage takes the damage. It needs to be healed takes the damage. So what Ashes does is with the army, let's say you have the healer unit in a group with, you know, 10 other healers and, you know, 50 regular fighting units. Those healers will, I don't know if communicate's the right word, but they will understand that the other units in that army are its responsibility. So if all of a sudden that leash range doesn't matter anymore, because it can see the status of the other units.
It floats within its army in a sense, rather than just its own leash range.
Right. Yeah. Its range doesn't matter because it's in the army, and it will seek out units in the army that it can help, and it will help them. So that is an artificial intelligence operation that we really don't see. And I don't know if it's something that's unique to Ashes, but that's one of the things that Brad's talking about, that sort of behavior. That's at least.
I guess I knew that was happening with the armies. I just didn't sit down and think about and say like, oh, that's impressive. I just said, oh, that's happening, you know. But,
right.
Okay.
So it's honestly something that's kind of subtle, because of the scale we're talking about. It's really easy to miss those sorts of interactions. But even if it's an incremental change, it can really add up over the course of a battle, or over the course of lots of battles happening simultaneously. You've got units living longer. You've got units automatically prioritizing their damage more to do more damage. So the battles themselves are allowed to be a little bit smarter all of a sudden. It's something you kind of have to look for. When I first was introduced to the army system, I was like, oh, big deal. All it does is keep the units together, and you can't select an individual unit inside of a group. I didn't really understand the importance, and Brad actually called me out on it. I wrote one of my first articles, I think my first impressions. I said, I don't see the point. I don't see the value. And he challenged me to actually, go take a look at it, and I did. And I think that's the sort of thing that can actually make a difference.
And I do think the army thing was something that kind of caught me out of the blue. I'm like, oh, this is pretty awesome. I do think it's something that I don't think will translate to other RTS, purely because it's such a contextual thing to that style and that magnitude.
Yes, and
I could never imagine that in a Company of Heroes style or a traditional, Command and Conquer StarCraft style either. But I think it takes that large scale RTS design, like the next large scale RTS. If it doesn't have that, it'll feel weird. It won't feel as good.
Right. Exactly. Yeah, it's kind of like the deep zoom that Supreme Commander implemented. It's something that you kind of look for in a large scale RTS, and even to some extent, Ashes has that. They don't, zoom out to see the whole map. You can see a significant portion of it. But when you zoom back in, it contextualizes where your cursor is, which, of course, is important in a game of that scale.
Yeah.
And also, it feels weird, even in games where you are zooming in and out, that doesn't have that. I can't remember. There was one other one.
Well, Active Aggression semi has that with its tactical view, but it's a little different, obviously. But.
Yeah, and I do think that is a valid... because Deserts of Kharak kind of has the same thing. That sort of tactical view where it lets you kind of jump back to see more of the map, but it kind of abstracts things. I think in a game like Company of Heroes that necessarily wouldn't work, because the camera in Company of Heroes is something they want you to fight.
And that's something interesting, too, is in the first Company of Heroes, you could actually go to a tactical map and just look at the sectors and where your armies were and things like that.
You can also do that in Company of Heroes, too.
Yeah, it's just a little hard. Like you used to be able to just click on the mini map and it would take you to it, and now it's like
Yeah, now
they almost
there's
don't.
a hotkey for it now.
Yeah, it's almost like they made it a little harder. Like, no, no, we want you to see our awesome engine in action. And I'm like, okay, I'll enjoy it. But yes, so
Um,
that's it. Go ahead. Sorry.
well,
Start again.
speaking of Company of Heroes, so one interesting thing about Ashes of the Singularity is if you look at a game like Total Annihilation or Supreme Commander, you have, I don't think I'm being too hyperbolic here, dozens of unit types. You know,
Hmm.
in Supreme Commander, you had what, 4 or 5, maybe 6 Tier 1 units, the same number of Tier 2 units, the same number of Tier 3 units, and then experimentals. That's upwards of what, 20 unit types per faction, give or take.
Yeah, I think 20 to 30, depending on. It's because some factions had more experimentals too. So.
Right. And then, of course, the expansion faction had fewer unit types as well, I think.
Oh yes, and some had navy, and so it's yeah.
And Ashes of the Singularity, you have 3 aircraft, only 3 different types of aircraft. You have 4 Tier 1 units, I think 3 Tier 2 units, and then 3 Tier 3 units. So it's actually a smaller pool of units to work with. Now, at first I was, and I still kind of am waiting for a transport, because I think of a game of that scale, it's kind of important. But when I was first introduced to that, I was really taken aback. I was like, where are the rest of the units? But I think, ultimately, if you're not a blind devotee of Supreme Commander, I think there's a case to be made that it actually makes sense. So in Supreme Commander, you had your Tier 2 units per unit of resource had more hit points but did less damage, I believe. Maybe it was the other way around.
No, you're right. I believe it's been a while since I played this
Yeah,
upcom
it's been a
game.
while. It's been a while. And then Tier 3, I think, basically did the same thing again. Or maybe it scaled the damage, how you got more damage per, because you've got the artillery and the snipers and stuff. Now, you also don't have, like, the super long-ranged artillery. You don't have the super, like, nuke.
Oh, and that's
weapon.
something Ashes does. I think is like because in SubCom you had like different types of artillery. You had like rockets versus just like shells. You know, rockets could move, shells would just land where they were going to land, and they're you know there's they added variety maybe where they didn't need it as much. You know,
And that's the point I was going to make, is you had these almost fiddly differences between the tiers of units. And most players, didn't care. You got Tier 2 units, and you just phased them in as quick as you could. You got Tier 3 units, you phased them in as quick as you could. In Ashes, all of your unit types matter. And what's more is through the Quanta system, you are able to build and utilize super weapons, kind of a la Company of Heroes, not Company of Heroes, Command and Conquer. And now the cool thing about that is not only are super weapons fun to use, and a large-scale game is the right situation for that, because you can have this big, flashy thing that doesn't automatically invalidate your opponent's entire strategy, because it's only hitting one of their armies or a part of their army. To use a super weapon, you spend Quanta, which is the same thing you spend to increase the size of your army. So you're making a very tactical choice there. Do I want a bigger army now? Or do I want to take the chance at doing something to him that he's not going to like? And I think that is potentially a more interesting system, because that is a very non-trivial choice. And usually this type of game, this game of this scale, doesn't have that kind of non-trivial choice, because you have hundreds of units, thousands of units even. Each individual choice you're making in a game, in a large-scale RTS, the impact of that's minimized. Now, what Oxide and Brad, I think, is lead game designer on Ashes of the Singularity, Brad Bordell, has done, is they've introduced that tactical decision-making into a game with thousands and hundreds of thousands of units. and I think that's kind of impressive. So for all the how much I want a transport, I think the core of the game is very smartly designed.
And that limited number of units does, I think, serve a purpose for like the reason you mentioned, but also because on that scale, the more units you have, the more you get redundancy when you don't need it. And it also just creates overly complex armies. You're like, okay, I have 5 rocket launchers, 17 missile launchers, and 2 anti-missiles, and it just becomes overly complex, and
well,
it doesn't add any depth to it either.
Too much of a numbers game is the way I look at it. It's all you care about is the percentage of what your army is made up of. I need 25% unit A, 17% unit B. Oh, maybe I need
And to be fair, that does exist in Ashes, but with fewer units, it's not as big a deal. It's not as weighted as heavily as it was when you had an even more variety. So it's nice to have fewer units, less to focus on. I do wish there were more units, but at the same time, I understand why they went that direction.
Well, and they already are talking about adding more factions, adding new unit types. They're talking about, in fact, adding navies, naval units. I don't know if that's the next thing or if that's coming down the pipe, but they've talked about adding naval units. They've talked about, I think, transports. They've talked about adding new factions. I think more to their campaign. This is a large and ongoing project, and they're not constrained in the same way that Blizzard is with StarCraft.
In the sense of, like, they have a ladder, but it's not a competitive in the sense of there's not players making living off of it.
Well, that I think that's a good point, but they're also not constrained by a mature lore.
Oh, yes, okay.
You can't
you
just
mean
throw
like
in a new faction.
lore that's existed since like 1997, 20 years or whatever.
You can't just throw a new faction into StarCraft. As much as I'm sure Blizzard might occasionally want to.
Well, they did it between Warcraft 2 and Warcraft 3. They added 2 new factions. So I guess they were already there lore-wise, though. At least the Night Elves were, but
yeah, they had to.
But to be fair, Warcraft's lore is, I mean, they're putting out encyclopedias for how much.
If they ever do Warcraft 4, they could probably have 6 factions. Although I think a Draenei faction would be pretty cool. I would play that.
I wouldn't complain. I love StarCraft more than Warcraft in an RTS, but I like the Warcraft lore more. Sorry, we're back to Ashes. We're getting sidetracked.
I'm not sure how much more I can add right now. But I think my biggest complaint, we've talked about a couple things. I think my big complaint, mechanically, is you have these moments where you're just kind of moving, because units move slowly in this game for the most part. Air units
like you said, that's a problem in almost every large scale RTS.
Yeah, no, that's definitely a problem in the large scale formula, but because of that, there are these lulls where you're just kind of watching your armies, execute this giant turn, or just march from one side of the map to the other, and you're like, what can I do? One of the things I like about Ashes is it definitely keeps the focus on the units, because it's kind of I feel like it's a large scale RTS almost with the soul or the heart of a smaller scale RTS. So you're not building hundreds of buildings all at once. In Supreme Commander, when you're setting up a new base, in fact they added a mechanic, I think, where you could pre-make bases and just plop them down, and your engineers would go build the buildings one at a time until the whatever you had pre-designed was built. You don't need that in Ashes of the Singularity, and I think that's a good thing. I think there are things about the Total Annihilation formula, and that's one of them, where you've got dozens and dozens of buildings that you're building that aren't really interesting. I think the most interesting part of an RTS is actually handling the units, and I feel like Ashes lets me focus on that more than.
Well, go ahead. Then you're some of the other ones, right?
Yeah.
But that was something interesting to me because you usually view those large-scale RTSs as very macro-oriented. You're pumping out, hundreds and thousands of units. But at the same time, so much is automated. Like if you look at in Supreme Commander 2, you can just queue up, I want, 2 tanks and 1 artillery over and over and over and over again.
Well, you can do the same thing in Ashes, too.
Mm-hmm. And that's one of the interesting things is, for being what, I don't know, in my mind I call them macro RTSs, even though most of the time you're not actually macroing. You're mostly just controlling these large armies or waiting for these large armies to engage, which is kind of counterintuitive, but at the same time, it's kind of nice they automate some of that for you.
I understand what you're saying, because the economies are large, but after a point they kind of manage themselves. Where in a game like StarCraft, you always have to be babysitting your economy. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I mean that's one of the anyone who watches competitive StarCraft or even something like Company Heroes, if you are not paying attention to your front line and you look away for 30 seconds or a minute, and you can just come back and they're just all gone in mortar shells or storms or whatever it is. You need to pay attention to those ones.
So anyway, I think that Ashes is a neat formula. I think they definitely have some growing to do. But I think it's a really solid formula for the most part.
Yeah. I there's a lot I still don't like about it, but I think it didn't revolutionize, but it was the next evolution in those large scale RTS. Every large scale RTS after this should look to this and say, okay, what can I learn from Ashes? I need to try to find some way to emulate or do something similar to the army system, and it's like a stepping stone.
Yeah, I think the army system is going to be important in large scale RTS going forward.
Mm-hmm.
Excuse me, jeez. It's all the pollen.
Allergies starting up for you.
Oh, I think it was like the 1st of May, the first day it got warm where I live. I couldn't breathe like the whole day. It was awful.
Where do you live that it's past the first day of May?
I'm sorry, did I say May? I meant March.
Yeah. Oh, it's okay. I'm like, is he in the future? What is this?
Yeah, I'm coming back from the... I'm Benjamin Buttoning. I'm living backwards. Is that how? I don't know. I never saw the Curious Case.
I just know the guy ages backwards. I don't know if he goes back in time.
Okay, well, I know there is a fiction where a character actually goes backwards in time. Not Gandalf. I was going to say Gandalf. The wizard from King Arthur.
Oh, Merlin.
Merlin. Thank you. I don't know why I was drawing a blank on that.
Gandalf, Merlin.
There is a fiction that the cartoon Sword in the Stone is based on, where Merlin is actually living backwards, and he's had to cope with he's got to talk backwards to him for people to understand him, and he remembers how the conversation ends, but not how it's going to begin. Mm-hmm. So it was a weird book, very weird book. It was like written to deal with. Written in the 1960s to deal with the politics of the time, and it uses the legend of King Arthur to kind of deal with the societal themes. It was not what I was expecting.
It's an interesting allegory and time period to do. But,
I think it was written in the 60s, though.
Okay.
I don't know why they chose King Arthur to do it. But anyway, back onto RTS. So the next thing, and we can't talk about this too much, so I'd like to just kind of get this out of the way. But Petroglyph has a new RTS coming out, and it's actually coming out like next week or this week. For when this episode probably is going to come out. It's called 8-Bit Armies, and I don't know if you've seen anything about it. Seen the trailer?
Something about RTS recently. They're also sneaky. Deserts of Kharak came out of nowhere like 3 months before its release, and I didn't know about 8-Bit Armies until like 2 weeks ago. I hadn't heard about it at all. And so I've only seen like a few images and things like that. I don't know much about it.
Well, I would encourage everyone, including you, to go watch the trailer. So, what it looks like to me, and now let me give a little bit of backstory. So, Petroglyph has obviously had a hard run of it. So they had Grey Goo, which was released in February of last year. It actually did pretty well for a while, I think, but it had a fairly...
and it had decent sales if the Steam numbers are any indicator. I don't think it sold great, but I think it sold decently.
But so they hired Petroglyph hired Weta Workshop to do all of the character design. I think they hired linguists to create actual languages for like the beta.
Their cinematics are very well done. Whoever they hired to do that.
No, I don't know if Weta Workshop actually did the cinematics, but yeah, they got a very professional company to do all the cutscenes, and incredible CGI. And I don't know how much they were able to make back from that, because of course the next game they released was Battle Battalions. And I actually did some of the pre-release testing for that. They didn't really do an extensive beta, but they did do kind of some alpha testing, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, it was. I think it's one of those games that was underrated and like no one knew about. But I'm like, oh, this is actually kind of fun, you know.
And they actually had some really neat plans. They were going to add, I think, some like skill shots to some of these. They were going to add.
Oh, really? I didn't know that.
Yeah, but they actually went through like 2 publishers with that before they got it launched.
Never a good sign.
Yeah, no, but it was fun, and I think.
But obviously, I don't think it was the rousing success they were hoping for.
No, and so I think they are maybe struggling a little bit financially, so they've had to kind of scale back their graphics to be these kind of blocky, almost like Minecraft-esque, retro graphics. I mean, it's fun. It's fun and colorful, and kind of got that.
And I do want to praise
bouncy sort of tanks.
Mm-hmm. I do want to praise Petroglyph real fast for still supporting Grey Goo after release so much, especially the past couple months.
And
they've done a great job.
The Shroud are a very well designed faction. They took elements from the Goo. They took elements from all their other factions, and while keeping with their no activated abilities mantra, they created some really interesting units. There's an artillery unit that creates this persistent area. It's got this little like creature inside of it, and the creature, invulnerable creature, runs around and attacks anything in the area. There's another unit that attacks units, and if the unit dies under the effects, it'll spawn like a zombie sort of thing. So they have some fun units, and in fact, there's a flying unit that's kind of like the Void Ray. Where the longer it's on something, the more damage it does, but the shot bounces to like 3 other units.
Mm-hmm.
So they've got some really fun designs, and I actually think that the Shroud kind of increased the micro potential.
Mm-hmm.
And all of the existing factions got a new unit. The humans got a unit called the Valiant that's modeled after Singleton. And the Valiant has an area of effect attack, which makes it valuable. But when it's not moving, it generates a force field that takes a portion of the damage that goes to units in the force field and directs it toward the Valiant. So you've either got to keep the Valiant moving to attack, or you've got to accept that it's going to die and try to protect more valuable units. So
I love binary units like that. I'm a big fan of that style of design, where you have to make a decision like, oh, crud, what do I do? What do I do? Move, I guess.
Well, right, but that also... one of the complaints about Grey Goo was, there's not a lot of micro you can do. Mostly it's playing around with the artillery of the various factions, trying to get those like leading the shots and stuff,
mm-hmm.
Or with their super units.
Yeah, and even watching I watched the World Championship or whatever they did to support their esports scene a couple months ago.
The Grey Goo tournament series, yeah.
Mm-hmm. And even those, it was enjoyable to watch, but at the same time, it felt, coming from a company Heroes and StarCraft scene, it felt very slow.
Yeah,
and playing Grey Goo, obviously, it is a slower game. That doesn't make it bad, but it is a slow game.
My 2 complaints about Grey Goo are, I feel like players should start with more resources. If you look at Command and Conquer, you start out with actually a fairly significant pool of resources to get yourself started off. And everything should move about 25% faster.
I think that would really give it a much better feel. I would 100% agree with that. And you're obviously a very big Grey Goo fan, probably the biggest I know, and so for you to have complaints,
Well, I feel like I've been very fair. I think their lore is very well done. I think I'd love to see more games in that universe. I I think that overall it's a solid game, and I think that a lot of people haven't been very fair to it. That they call it a crappy StarCraft knockoff or whatever. I think the they've done some good things and bad things, and I'm definitely one of the most vocal proponents of the game. But that doesn't mean that I'm.
Oh no, yeah, I know.
I'm being a fanboy.
And one of the things that Gregu obviously suffered was from when EA shut down their RTS studios. Most Command and Conquer fans just moved over to play StarCraft 2, which was released a few years afterwards, you know. And so when news of like a new Command and Conquer style RTS came, you have all these StarCraft 2 fans saying, "Oh man, I can't wait to play this," because they were former Command and Conquer fans,
so
and then
I actually
didn't work out.
Did a 2-part series last year comparing Grey Goo to Command and Conquer games, and there are some things that I feel like it does better, and there are some things that I feel like it does worse. And one of those things was the building system. I think in Command and Conquer, one of the most interesting things is that your production is tied to your HQ and what do they call those? The little cranes, I think, that you can build. And they don't have those in all of them. I think they introduced that in Command & Conquer 3? Maybe Red Alert 2. They introduced like a crane that lets you build extra buildings. And obviously in Grey Goo you can just build as many buildings as you want.
Which is madness. Madness. Can't build things willy-nilly.
But anyway, I did a 2-part series on that, and they come up with some things better and some things worse. But the pacing is one of the most important things. All of the Command and Conquer games, all of them except 4, especially Red Alert 3, very fast. Your bases come up quick. Your units die very quickly. They move very quickly, and that's one of the hallmarks. And I feel like Command and Conquer fans who are used to that, they saw units moving slowly and dying slowly. These more kind of ponderous battles, and I think that as much as anything kind of turned players off. And I really wish they'd just kind of even if they took everything and increased the speed 25% across the board. I think that would be interesting. Now they could probably do it a little more dynamic, where the fast units move even faster, and everything moves a little faster, but you increase the speed of some units more than others.
Well, I think it would mess up with the goo versus goo battles, where you just take your mother goo and just ram each other for about 5 minutes to see who wins.
I think the goo are a very interesting design.
Oh, I love the Grey Goo design.
But the goo are the cause of some of the design choices that players like or were most vocal about. For instance, the population cap of 200 units is actually there because of the mother goo. Because they had to constrain mother goo production in some way, so you couldn't, have 40
Make a
mothers.
wall of them and just move across the map.
Well, but the more mothers you have, the more units you have, and the more mothers you have. So that's if you look at the goo macro game. Once you get 4 or 5 mothers, all of a sudden, then you've got 8, and then you've got 10, and then you're maxed out, and then you can just start
There's that economic boom,
Right, but because of how their production works, you've got this kind of geometric progression after a point.
We're getting off track. How does this apply to 8-bit armies? Okay, sorry.
So, it does apply back to 8-bit armies. Because
okay, good. I didn't take you too far.
As near as I can tell, it is very much a Command and Conquer game. It's got the power plants that we've seen in all the Command and Conquer games. It looks a lot to me like Tiberian Sun or Red Alert 2. Now, I don't know what type of resources they have. I don't know too terribly much, but I think it's got the same sort of combat you'd expect from an honest-to-goodness Command & Conquer game. If you look at the trailer they've released, units seem to move very quickly, die very quickly. If you look at the base designs, you see some very clear analogies to classic Command & Conquer unit designs and base designs. So
I'm not opposed to that being the selling point. That's like the tagline: 8-bit CNC. You know, I
Yeah,
like that.
and
Put that on a box.
I really feel like it's going to be very similar. Um, and hopefully, once it comes out, we can cover it again and say, hey, look, this is just like Command & Conquer. But I did want to talk about that really briefly because it is coming out, and I think it's...
And kind of along those lines, another quick note is Tooth and Tail, which is,
Oh my
another kind of
gosh.
low res. But I'm really excited for Tooth and Tail. Really excited.
I actually got to interview Andy Schatz the last episode, effectively, because our last episode got deleted. I interviewed him, and they are developing it for console and PC. They have what sounds like, and of course I haven't had a chance to try it, but a fairly elegant system to control your armies. I think they actually already published a... if I knew we were talking about it, I'd try to pull it up. But they already published a key binding for PC and console of how it's supposed to work. But it's like, I think if you hold right-click, it'll continually reissue a move order. And if you right-click once, it'll issue an attack move for your whole army. Something like that. But how it works is you select a predefined list of unit types. Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3.
Mm-hmm.
I think there's 5 or 6 different units you can pick. And you capture these windmills, and you build farms around them, and the farms generate food. And then you build the burrows, which automatically spawn units, so long as you got the money to pay for them, to a set maximum per burrow. So if I build a Tier 1 burrow, it'll build 5 Tier 1 units, and then stop. And then when one dies, it'll build another one for me. So you build another burrow, it builds another 5. So your population cap for your army is tied to how many burrows you have. And I think they've got some turrets and stuff like that too. And you have I want to say, I guess commander is the best word, not a hero. You've got a commander unit that cannot attack, but serves as the rally point for your army, basically. And they said that they kind of experimented with having the commanders attack, but they didn't want it to turn into more of a MOBA. They wanted to keep it in RTS, and that's kind of the basic formula. Is you pick your deck of units, and I think it auto picks the last deck you chose. You run around the map capturing windmills. The maps are randomly generated, which is interesting. There's varied success with that. I think Age of Empires did well with that, but
Mm-hmm. It really comes down to the style of RTS, and if most other RTS it doesn't work. But I think based off of the videos I've seen of this one, I think it could work pretty well.
It looks fast-paced and fun. I've seen a couple of tournaments. It definitely seems interesting, and I'm very excited to get a chance to play it. And we've been talking for about an hour, so we're probably going to have to try to wrap up the recording.
Well, let's wrap up on the active aggression changes, because that's actually bigger news than a lot of people think. So.
Yeah, so very few RTS have done what Eugen is doing with active aggression. Let's put that on the table. It's very uncommon to see this. Almost never do you see this. And
if it is done, it's usually done as an expansion or something like that. It's never done just like in the middle with no pay change or anything like that. It's just we're remaking the game, guys.
Huge news. So what they've done is they've taken the units are more or less the same. They've kind of reorganized them in the tech tree a little bit, but they've taken the base building, how base building works. They've taken the economy from 4 resources to 1, 3 resources to 1, I guess. Or 4 to 2, depending on how you count power. I think it's more of a system, but I guess you could count it as a resource. And they have completely changed how air units work. Those are kind of the 3 big... There's more to it, I think, but those are kind of the 3 big pillars.
Mm-hmm.
So, first and foremost, with base building, one of the interesting mechanics that they had originally was you selected what you wanted built and where you wanted it built, and then it would automatically deduct resources from your account, kind of streaming it like Command & Conquer does, until it paid for the building. Then it effectively put the money into an automated unit, and that unit by itself drove out to where the building was supposed to go and built it, or flew. I think the one faction had flying builders. So what that did is it created this kind of weird situation where you really couldn't control the timing of a building because based on how much money you had, it wouldn't send the unit out until it could pay for the building. And it really didn't let you control where your unit was going and what it was going by to get to its destination. So you had situations where this automated unit with thousands of your resources inside of it would just, drive wherever it wanted to get to your building site. And that was really exploitable. What they've done now is they've moved from a streaming system to a chunk pay, kind of how StarCraft works, where you have to have the funds in the bank before you, or when you build the building. You can build builder units, and so this is a lot more like Command & Conquer Generals. The builder unit's still spent. No, it's not. It's not. I'm sorry. You build the builders, and then just like Generals, you send them out and they build them, and you can control them just like any other unit in the game, which is a big deal. It's a more familiar system.
It alters the flow of how that macro side goes.
Yeah, and I mean, before, everything was tied to your command structure, because your command structure had all your tech and all your buildings and stuff. And it took me like 7 to 10 hours to just learn navigating the menus. It was very hard for me to understand, how the different factions worked. And now it's simple. You build a builder, and the builder does its thing, and you got your tech tiers and everything. It makes a lot more sense to me now. Mm-hmm. I prefer the Chimera, kind of the European Union faction, and so in active aggression, each faction handles building differently. So the U.S. forces, I think they can build anywhere they want now. They have no real restriction on where they can build. The Chimera can build around either an HQ or their outpost, which is resource storage. And I think the other faction, the Cartel, can build around... There's 2 other buildings. It's like their HQ and their refinery or something. Mm-hmm. And before there were these really arcane rules, like the Chimera, or the U.S., like every time you built something, it expanded your build radius, and it was very arcane, and it's a lot easier to understand now. So as far as building goes, I'm very happy with what they've changed. Everything makes a lot more sense now.
And Active Aggression is a game that I think has a really, really good core, but had a lot of systems that were either overly complex, not explained well, or just weren't well designed. But there's a lot about Active Aggression that I'm excited about in the future, because when I played it, I'm like, oh, I want to like this game so much, but there's just these factors are just holding me back.
How I describe Eugen is they make amazing games that they don't seem to want people to play. Like
that's a good description.
Red Dragon, the war game games, are amazing. My God, they're incredible. Like, you build your deck and you have all like these tons of units you can choose from, and they have all these stats, and they have realistic line of sight, and all these interesting systems, and the maps are really well done, but everything is a pain to learn and to use, and so how do I know if Unit A is better than Unit B is better than Unit C is better than Unit Z? So even building a deck in Wargame, this I'm getting on a rabbit trail, I know, but the game is incredible, but it takes dozens of hours to even kind of come to grips with the game, and people do. I mean, I think thousands of people still play it, but it's very intimidating to get into, and Active Aggression was kind of the same way, that it had all these amazing systems, but you had to fight so hard to like the game. Mm-hmm. By the time you learned it, you liked it, but it took so long to get to the point where you liked it that many people didn't commit the time and energy.
Hopefully, this redesign will help.
Well, so
bridge that a little bit.
And I know I've already learned the game, but base building seems far simpler and more straightforward to me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a much more understandable system. Now, really quickly, air units are basically call-ins now. So the units themselves still have hit points, but basically you target an area, and the air units will fly in, do their thing, and fly out. I haven't really played with this too much. I've only done a couple of skirmishes. I want to give it more time. But they said something about they wrote a blog post covering how air units work, and I don't know if you dynamically issue an exit point or if it automatically assigns an exit point for the planes from the map based on the direction that you call them in from.
Mm-hmm.
But they have unlimited ammo, so as they're flying to their target, they will attack units, and they'll drop their payload, or they'll circle and strafe, and then they'll leave. But they can be shot down by anti-air fire, and I don't know if there's maybe another call-in that calls in anti-air units or something. But it's apparently they wanted it to be more automated, less finicky, which I think is a good direction to go in. Now, the change I'm not sold on. So they originally had 3 resources: oil, which turned into money, aluminum, and rare earth, or yellow, blue, and red, basically. They've removed aluminum and rare earth, and the only resource now is cash, which you get from oil wells. So,
and I agree with you there, because in some senses, where you start and what resource you had around you, early game usually dictated what you were going to build. And while I like the simplification, I think it also removes some of that strategic necessity in the early game before you can move outward.
I think they either identified the issue incorrectly, or they really went overboard in correcting it. So to me, the issue was less the number of resources as it was understanding how you went about getting them. I think each faction had a different requirement for gathering rare earth, and rare earth was essentially the tier 3 resource. So all your high-tech units, all your super weapons and stuff needed that to be able to be purchased. And each faction had a drastically different method of activating the collection of rare earth minerals. And then I think the Chimera focused primarily on oil, and then so they only really needed aluminum, or vice versa, as a tech resource. But most of the units cost, I think it was most of the units cost oil. I don't remember. I'd have to look it up. I've not been playing it as much as I should have, and I want to write an article, side-by-side comparison, and I want to focus on the economy, because I do not necessarily feel like that was the best choice.
Mm-hmm.
The other issue with the system was how very terribly quickly people ran out of resources.
You could mine out a map, I guess you could say, fairly quickly.
Well, so mid-game, effectively, all of a sudden, everything's mined out. And you had to kind of pre-prepare for that by setting up multiple prisons and capturing prisoners of war and using your faction's prison mechanic to generate resources for the rest of the game.
I remember watching you stream. It was probably your 3rd or 4th game, you said. And midway through the game, you're like, wait, why am I broke? And you look around the map and you're like, where'd all my money go? Why is the oil all gone? And you just didn't get it. You're like, I don't understand why my resources are all gone.
Yeah, and it definitely did not do a good job of educating the user on the importance of prisons or how to monopolize them. Because again, each faction used a different system for prisons. You could sell prisoners back and it would do different things.
Mm-hmm.
I think they might have even gained different passive benefits from holding prisons. So it's a lot more. The system's a lot more understandable, which I think is what they were going for. But I think they've stripped a lot of the nuance out of the game with what they've done. And it's a hard choice. It really is a hard choice. But I think that the issue is not necessarily how many resources they had, but how difficult they were to work with and how quickly they were exhausted. Now, prisons definitely make more sense in this context because you've got the one resource and you hold the prisoners and they give you money. Very simple. But I think they might have hit this one a little hard. That being said, they have released several new maps that look like they all have both more banks, which I think they may have changed the name of. It was banks. You'd store infantry in the bank and it would generate money over time. They have more of those and more resource points. So it looks like they're kind of giving you more things to worry about, more things to think about. Because what I feel like they've done is you used to have, I think you were mining at any given time from 1 to 2 of each type of resource point. Cutting that back, basically you only have like 4 mining operations going on total. So they've really cut back on the amount of mental and physical overhead you have to maintain to mine resources. But it looks like their new maps may have taken that into account and given you more points of interest. I hope that's the case. I haven't tried out any of their new maps yet, but that would be I think that would go a long way to kind of allaying my fears, my reservations, to give you those more systems to think about. But yeah, that's my concern at this point, is in seeking to make the game more approachable. I think they did a great job with base building. It makes a lot more sense to me now. I think air units are fine. I mean, this is a game primarily focused on infantry and vehicles, and you still have the helicopters that you can control. So the air units being call-ins, kind of a wash. It seems like it makes sense. I'm not upset and I'm not completely thrilled. It's kind of a neutral to me.
It just is.
Yeah, it just is. But at this point, the changes to the resource system, while I think it would make it easier to manage, I'm wondering if they didn't pull it back too far. I hope that these new maps will kind of showcase some improvements for the resource.
And it is in beta, so that they, you never know. Maybe they'll rethink that change specifically, or we'll see what they do.
Yeah, and I'm not sure how far along the beta is. I'm kind of hoping that I get a chance to write about it and provide some feedback before they go live, because I really want to do a side-by-side comparison. I want to say I played, 5 skirmish matches focused on, base building. Here's my results for the beta. Here's my results for the current game. And so on and so forth for all their changes. And not just kind of speculate like we are now. I want to be able to say, I played both, one after the other, and here's what I think. I think that would be a really valuable. I mean, you never get to do that when writing about an RTS is to provide feedback on kind of like A/B testing. I think that's a really interesting opportunity, and I kind of hope I get the chance. My next article I want to write about Ashes of the Singularity. I want to time this actually to come out at the same time as Ashes, my Ashes piece, because I'm going to be using pretty much what we said. All right, so yeah, we had a lot of good stuff to talk about. We got Ashes of the Singularity just launched. We've got 8-Bit Armies coming out on the 22nd, and of course the active aggression changes. And you're right. I mean, it's an exciting game. They have a lot of neat ideas, but they just made them so hard to enjoy. And I think at the very least they've corrected. They've gone a long way to correcting that. One other thing that we did not mention at the beginning, but is nonetheless true, is Offworld Trading Company is exiting early access and officially launching. I'm pretty sure it's the 28th of this month.
Oh, wow, really? I did not know that.
Yeah. Let me double check. Let me check their site real quick. Offworld Trading Company. It's very soon, at any rate. Double check 8-Bit Armies, too. Yep, 4/28, 2016. So Offworld Trading Company is launching in 11 days.
Wow, I did not. I mean, it's a game I've known about for a long time, and I didn't think. I guess I thought it was already launched, or it was in perpetual beta, you know? But
Yeah,
that's
no,
awesome to
they
hear.
went to early access about a year ago, give or take. I think it was last February,
Hmm.
if memory serves. I actually bought into the founders. I think I got access to it like 2 weeks before they went early access.
Okay.
And pretty much every major patch I've gone in and kind of taken a look. I think it has a really big potential to be kind of like a almost a party game, because it's an RTS without armies. It's very much, it feels like a board game. It really feels like a real
Yeah,
time
it's
board
pretty much
game.
I'm gonna make more money than you type of game versus.
Well, and that's kind of what I like about it, is
Yeah.
you're never out until the very second, until the very last second when someone buys you out completely. You're not out of the game. You always have it, even if it's kind of a false chance. It gives you the impression that you can, I can turn this around. I can, make some changes to bring myself back into this. You don't really feel like that a lot in most RTS, and I think that's something that RTS would benefit from. Is it's so hard to get around this slippery slope, and I think a game like Company of Heroes doesn't really have that slippery slope. You can have 3 squads and win a game against someone that has 20, or not 20, but 10.
I was like, wow, that's a lot of squadrons.
Yeah, they're playing Ostrupen Commander. No,
Yeah.
10 squads. I've seen players win with like 2 infantry squads and 1 tank against someone that has a lot more than that.
Mhm.
But StarCraft, one bad encounter you might lose.
Mhm.
One bad fight, you might be out of it. And I think Offworld Trading Company kind of gives you that feeling of, I can turn this around, I can bring this back.
Mhm. Which gives it more relaxed feel, versus the high, more competitive
My
RTS.
problem is there's so much to think about, or so many variables. It's really hard for me to tell how well I'm doing, and the choices you make at the beginning of the game can really impact. Oh, I think I might have to go. All right, everybody, thank you for listening. This has been Rebellious Tacticians Show. I'm Wayward, and this is Topher, and we're signing off.
See you, everyone.